Welcome to Software Without Borders, where we explore how technology, leadership, and global execution come together in the early days of an AI developing world to drive real business outcomes. I'm Andy Hilliard, CEO of Accelerance, and I'm joined by my co-host, Tomas Hilliard, Chief Strategy Officer of Accelerance. So today's guest is Duncan Grazier, Chief AI Officer at BuildOps. Duncan has led engineering through hypergrowth, IPO environments, and now into one of the most important shifts we've seen in decades, the move from traditional software companies to AI native companies.
What stood out to us about Duncan isn't just what he's building, but how he's thinking. He's focused on how companies themselves need to evolve, how teams operate, how work gets done, and how AI actually creates leverage inside organizations. Duncan, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Tomas. Very happy to be here. Very excited to talk about this. I think in that 3-minute intro, probably some new tool came out about in the AI space that we have to go learn about. So we should dig right in.
That's fantastic. But before we dig into the AI weeds, I'd like to get a little feel and have the audience get a little feel for who you are. Sort of, if you can give us a quick synopsis of your background and maybe, one thing that's not on your LinkedIn profile that helps define you as a human.
Yeah, great. So Duncan Grazier, as said, I'm currently the Chief AI Officer at BuildOps. Before that was the CTO of a publicly traded company. Before that, VP of Engineering. Before that, Director of Engineering, so on and so forth. So I've done kind of the standard journey that engineering leaders go on, right? Started as a software engineer, did some consulting, did some international consulting, did some outsourcing, so on and so forth. And so that's kind of the journey. Along that journey, I've done a lot of blogging, a lot of writing, a lot of research, a lot of thinking on engineering leadership, what it means to lead a team, what it means to be a founder, a leader, an owner, a process owner. How do you handle change? How do you hear shifts? The mobile change, geospatial, the Web 2.0, blockchain, and now, of course, AI, which I'm sure we're going to talk in depth about. And I think the funny thing, we were just talking about this, but I've been deeply involved in some civic politics. I live in a very small town, and so I actually built an app that is not on my LinkedIn to help people with traffic studies, right? The biggest challenge in civic is the cost of doing traffic studies. So how do you get information to your political leaders faster to make better decisions? I think we could democratize that. So that's something I've been very passionate about that I've been working on.
Great. Thanks for the super fast and quick and precise synopsis. And the traffic study app sounds really cool. But you've operated at scale, right? Large teams, high growth environments, real production systems. So when did you realize that the traditional way of building and running software organizations wasn't going to hold up in this new AI era?
I think it started with, we've now dropped the cost of code creation to nearly zero. And what are all the downstream second order and third order effects of that change? So we interview based on people's output and the outcomes they're driving. We do promotions based on the quality of the work. We talk about impact. We talk about all of these things. How many deploys, how many releases, how many pull requests, how many reviews have you done? And so if you look at the entire ecosystem of what it means to be like a software developer or run a software-based business, the initial inception of AI was, hey, we can write code better. Now it's we can write code and review it better. Now it's we can write code, we can review it, and we can build infrastructure and scale building. So really where it started was, I think everything's going to break and is breaking all at the same time. And you can see that if you look at the trends every single day, some new mind-blowing thing is coming out that makes a different role or function not irrelevant, but just changes that dynamics of the situation, right? How you deploy and release has changed. How you validate work has changed. How you write PRDs. How you do knowledge bases. Obviously, the new thing is wiki LLMs and all of those sorts of things. So I think what I would say is I realized very quickly that the kind of the initial core way of doing work is going to shift, and there's going to be second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth order effects after that.
Well, you just mentioned that everything broke at once. Did everything break at once, or was there something that sort of started to break initially? It seems like everything's coming at us much faster than even the pundits were saying 6 months ago or even a year ago. But can you address what was starting to break, or what was the impetus sort of how you had to think about the old way is not the new way, and the new way is coming fast, and it's nearly upon us?
I think the first actual unit that broke was the pipeline from pull request to production, right? So there's so much more work output happening, code being generated, ideas being generated, tickets being finished, right? But how do you QA that? How do you validate that? What about code review? How do you make sure that work is production ready before it goes to production, right? In the old ways of working, you built a lot of gates and a lot of different validation checks, and whether a human done or a test or unit test or automation, right? We started to see all of that stuff break in the pipeline in and of itself. So yes, more code was being generated, but we're not getting more valid work out to production in like a relative linear to that of if there's 10 more PRs, like not 10 more things are going to production, right? And so
Yeah.
that's probably the first unit of measure that broke. Once you fix that, you make automation and validation faster, right? And you start working your way down that. But what we've then realized is upstream of that, what work should we work on next? We're doing work faster, but are we working on the right thing next from an alignment communication? So there's like 0 with order and -1 order and -2 order, right? Going left of the software development lifecycle.
Yeah.
So I think the first unit was code creation was a lot faster, but it didn't mean the outcome and the impact was happening just as fast.
Yeah, that seemed like maybe it was the first thing you had to unlearn as a leader. Was there anything else you had to sort of reset your brain on and approach differently? Like how did you look at it?
The quality of output has kind of flattened between a junior engineer, a mid-level, and a senior engineer. I think that's the other part that's really interesting. A junior software engineer can create as much software now as a senior engineer. So then the question is, how do you measure judgment? You know, another thing that I think not a lot of people are talking about is how do you validate someone's readiness for promotion? Are they a senior engineer? Are they a principal engineer? What are the metrics and inputs to feed that? And what it used to be is like, could they work on a really big project and ship it on their own safely? AI is going to help support anyone do that in the organization now, not alone, let alone software engineers. So I think that's the other area that is untapped and unfigured out for engineering leaders and leaders as a whole of like, how do you know someone is good at their job if AI is doing a lot of the busy work and a lot of the heavy lifting for what they're doing?
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
that shift from what worked before to what works now seems to be really the core of everything that we're going through right now. Don't you agree?
Yeah, and I think the key thing is everything's changing. I know we kind of touched on it before, but it's promotion readiness, it's interviewing. If you're going to do a take-home test to validate someone's software abilities, they're going to use AI. And so the question is, how do you validate that? You know, you're not just testing Claude. Well, you don't want to test Claude on a take-home, right? You want to test their thinking, their judgment. That's a very hard problem to solve as a leader and as an engineering leader.
Yeah, I guess it's not. Well, everything is changing on how you do things, but nothing is changing on what sort of outcomes you want as far as getting better software, more dependable software to market faster, getting market feedback, things like
Try
that.
outcomes.
Yeah.
Duncan, let's stick on this point of transition. When I was doing my pre-podcast homework on you, you have a very impressive stat on your public profile, which is you help scale an engineering organization from 30 to 300 engineers. To me, that represents a really successful metric, maybe in the way that we'd build in 2019 or 2020. But you are at the forefront of AI and building through AI. So I'm curious, what would be a new metric that we can hang success on in today's environment?
Luckily, Andy gave me the perfect lead in for what I'm about to say, but it's really about the outcome should remain the same, if not elevated, with greatly reduced humans to for lack of a better word, right? A single human can output more. So instead of going from 30 to 300, maybe go from 30 to 150 and still get the output of 300. Or I'm an optimist, right? What I would say is you still go 30 to 300, but they're doing 10 to 12x the output that they were doing before. So your output in the business value you're driving to your customers is dramatically increased. So you still spend the money, you still hire the people, you make them AI native, and you give them the tools to create 5, 10, 12 times as much output. So they're outputting like 2,000 people or 1,800 people, but at the same time, your cost basis is around that 300 person mark. And so I think that's a really interesting opportunity. So you're still measured the same, but it's really outcome driven and output driven as opposed to, raw headcount. Like you said, 2019 was hire, grow, right? And in this case, it's going to be the same plus outcome.
How do you compare that to maybe some of the hype stories that we're seeing online now where people are creating billion-dollar companies with one person and an army of agents?
I love it. I think it's going to happen. It's going to continue to happen. I actually did some thinking and actually published a post today about it. And it's really about, I think the org chart is going to change pretty dramatically. I think it's going to flatten out. I think there's going to be a lot more autonomy, more guardrails, less gates. And I think in that sense, you might see the 1 to 5 person company be $1 billion valuation, so on and so forth. But I think you're still going to see companies have 200-300 people, but each one of them is going to be an individual squad, the person who can write the PRD, do the design, ship the software, do the validation. So you're going to have 300 parallel squads operating at once, as opposed to having, 6 or 7 teams working on anything at the same time. So I think you're going to see a very flat, autonomous, guardrailed organization scale up and really, really create that kind of like 10x, 100x, 1,000x return on your investment from a headcount perspective.
Really interesting. So I think we're on the same page also as far as the efficiency and effectiveness of the tools. There's a lot of noise surrounding these tools and AI in general. We have co-pilots, agents, and automation kind of running wild now. So from where you sit, where is AI actually delivering meaningful impact today? And where do you feel like teams are still fooling themselves about where it's actually driving value?
I think there's a lot of writing about this, so I'm going to crib a couple smart people's thoughts, but the taste concept and the judgment concept where, yes, an agent can do anything and you can train a skill to do anything for you, but does it have the right judgment to write the right decision? Right? I think that's still going to be a very, very important part of being a software developer and an engineering team. So I think there's a lot of hype about it being fully automated. I think it's always going to be human on the loop or in the loop in some of these contexts. And so what I would say, the tools today get you to 80%. You can get 80% of the work done in 0 minutes, 2 minutes, 3 minutes type stuff, just burning tokens. But that 80 to 100%, whether that's scale, security, optimization around workflow, whatever those things are, that's really the judgment about the product you're building. I think you're going to need really smart people to work on that. And I think that's where software engineering is kind of going to go back to real engineering, where you actually have judgment, you have context, you have the math behind what you're trying to build and the scale, the security, so on and so forth. I think there's a lot of hype in that space. I'm not sure we solved it yet, but I think on one hand, boilerplate solved. On the back end, his architecture and system design solved. I don't think so. Not quite yet. So that's how I think about it.
Yeah, that comment really resonates with me. Some feedback that we got from one of our recent clients who is experimenting with a low code environment and fewer developers is saying that it does not have the humanistic taste or considerations that normal developers do. And so while the product is functional, there's still mismatches and gaps in between how clients and customers eventually will use our product and what AI is spitting out now. So I'm in complete agreement with you. Have you found this to be the case through trial and error, or is this through, just understanding how the different development tools are working now, missing that taste element?
I think the app that I was talking about, that Civic app around just speeding, and it was really just a toy app to play with some of these capabilities and kind of ground up, knowing a lot, having a lot of context and understanding software, right? To basically take a tool off the shelf and say, can I ship a product end to end, get in the app store, fully reviewed, high quality, valid, so on and so forth. I would say that my personal experience, anecdotal, not quantitative at all. I probably should have measured it at all, given my role and what I talk about in the world. I probably got it to 80% done in a week. And then it took 3 weeks to just vibe code and prompt engineer and context engineer my way to where, it's something I'm proud of shipping and writing the blog post and putting my name on, right? Because people are going to come to me and be like, why did you ship an app that didn't work or is incomplete and so on and so forth, right? And so anecdotally, yes. I think you're seeing it at companies too, right? People are saying, I could build a lot of toy apps. I'm shipping a lot of toy capabilities. Here is a POC, but that POC to production, still a pretty big gap today. It'll collapse, but I think that's where that taste and judgment comes in, that you're going to need to lean on your teams for.
Interesting. As we continue our conversation, I'm anticipating that you will advise companies to be very intentional about their AI strategy. For those that are not building intentionally, where do you feel like they might be over-investing too early at the moment?
I think people driving the burn more tokens to show more value concept is very painful for me. I'm getting echoes of lines of code and some of the gnarly habits from the early days of software development that I think we've gotten away from when we start talking about quality and taste and pragmatism and solution orientation and all of these things. It's really about driving an outcome, right? You have a problem. You need to develop a solution. That solution is going to drive value, whether that value is a reduction in churn, an increase in revenue. What is the business outcome you're driving towards, right? So how do you build a loop and put AI in that loop? It used to be humans, lots of different kind of functional humans. Now we're going to put AI in that loop to drive that capability or that solution to move some kind of outcome-driven value up and to the right, down and to the right, whichever way that it is, right? And so I think companies that don't think about it as a system all working together and are driving for point solutions in a very, very focused way are kind of missing the forest through the trees. And so I've been kicking around, what would my deck be? My pitch deck be to any one of these companies? It would be like, what are your key metrics and how is AI going to help you move them? Not ad tokens burning or, reduction in headcount, right? Obviously, you're seeing a lot of noise around that. So I think there's two kind of main areas. People are too focused on the individual metric and not looking at the system as a whole, which I think, as you all know, is pretty a problem at every business, right? And now we're just seeing it exacerbated pretty dramatically today.
Yeah. So it's synopsis of what I'm hearing from you. It's really not the issue lying with the tools. It's how the organization structures and support its employees to be able to leverage those tools.
Yeah. So I wanted to jump on that, Tomas. And first, before I do that, I just find it fascinating that the word taste has come up maybe a half a dozen or more times in this conversation, and I thought I discovered that maybe a few weeks ago because there was, I forget what event, and someone was mentioning how critical that is, and it's sort of a missing part that people are ignoring, and it's really becoming more important to the software development process. But all of a sudden, it's like a concept like taste, a word like taste, just catches fire, and everyone's using it. I'm sure next week there'll be a new phrase or a new term.
Later today, maybe. Let's go check the internet and see what's changed in the last 30 minutes, right?
It's crazy how things happen so fast. But anyway, back to the point about how are organizations structured to adopt AI. Companies are struggling to adopt AI, and specifically, software engineering ecosystems are adopting it quickly. But is the system-wide, is the enterprise-wide adoption really a technical problem, or is it something deeper? I mean, where are breakdowns? Where are issues or breakdowns or gaps right now between, say, product and engineering and leadership, and how are those to be addressed when one ecosystem is sort of taking the lead and is completely changing, how it approaches things, the velocity in which it can produce software, but it's still, I mean, as we said at the very beginning, things are 180 degrees, they're changing dramatically, but business models and how services or products are delivered to customers and feedback is received, and that's still kind of the same.
I think the product development lifecycle and all of the different components and people involved with that are 10,000 steps ahead of everybody else, whether that's the go-to-market function, the support functions. They have some point tools, chatbots, and maybe some like marketing automation tooling and some like Gen AI stuff in those contexts. But if you think about how much the software development and product development life cycles changed in the last 6 months, it's 10,000 iterations further ahead than where it was, because tip of the spear, first movers are always buy the newest, greatest software, and we were always that way, right? And then when you look at the cultures of the other organizations, and you look at the finance organization, they haven't changed. They don't change the rules ever, right? They're never going to. The way to do accounting hasn't changed in quite a while, right? And so I don't think it's fear, and I don't think it's mistrust. I think it's momentum. And so then the question becomes, from my perspective, how do you work with these functions to have them understand that we can increase their momentum, we can drive their velocity forward, we can give them the tools and the capabilities to say that, like, you don't have to do busy work doing cross-reference checks in Excel files. Like, there's a tool that could do that for you, right? So give them the capabilities in a trusted, safe way, just the way that we saw. Okay, cool, I can have it write lines of code. Now people are having it ship entire apps right on the product side. So then how do you kind of like take them through that iteration in a way that's trusted, it's safe, it's validated. I think that is the key at the individual and kind of like functional level. I think one of the biggest challenges that I see is founders, VCs, investors are saying, if you're not using AI for everything that you do, you're going to fall behind, right? So they're generating a lot of fear and a lot of wake around those concepts. If
Yeah.
you're the CFO of an organization, how do you translate down to your team? How do you convince the controller that AI is safe in that context, right? So I think there's a kind of like a big gap in context between what the company wants you to do and what you can actually do with your job today. And I think it's going to take a little while to fill those gaps. So I think how do you provide them the safe tools, the right validations to give them that opportunity to where that they feel like their job's going to get easier, they're going to build momentum, they're going to learn better skills, so on and so forth. I think that change and that transformation's yet to be discovered. I think a lot about how did you teach people to be typists, to use word processors, or how did you do like phone switching? There's a couple of these like innovations that come along from a technology perspective, and there's a life cycle that come along with them. And I think we're very early outside of like the product life cycle on AI. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I think there's a lot of fear there as well.
Yeah. So different functions, need to coexist and reach some level of harmony and consistency across these different functions. And I'm just and I guess over time, the different functions will, find ways to align themselves, orchestrate amongst themselves. Where do you think the biggest gap is right now between, say, leadership, product, and software engineering?
The metrics people are looking at, we touched on a little bit before. I think like if you're worried about tokens and the engineers are working about shipping features and products worried about moving a product metric, all of those things are not diametrically opposed, but they can fall into opposition of each other. And I think that becomes a big problem from an alignment orchestration perspective. And that's why I go back to that first principles thinking of like, what are your core business metrics? What are the things that actually matter to the success of your business? And that's where you can bring some of these teams into alignment. Like if everybody's driving to growth revenue and drive down costs of doing business, you can get aligned on that. Even finance team or the marketing team, everybody, right? And you can start, maybe you add on that forward deployed engineer concept inside your organization to have an engineer go sit with the finance team, look at what they're doing and help build tools to help them drive those metrics that they didn't know that they could do. Right. So I think it goes back to the hierarchical understanding of what your business does, how it works, what you need for it to be successful. That's where you draw alignment from a first principles perspective. And I think AI is showing companies that maybe they're not as aligned as they thought they were. They're doing a lot of work. Yeah. Everybody was executing, but like, is everybody really going in the same direction, aligned to the same concepts, like same KPIs? And I think people are finding maybe not as much as they thought that they did. And AI is exacerbating it because output's so much higher.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of cultural anxiety. There's a lot of inter-organizational and intra-functional distrust in how each function is adopting AI. But to your point, if you focus on your business model and your core business KPIs, and just continue to focus on those basic metrics, the different functions tend to gravitate towards more self-orchestration and they tend to move towards the middle as opposed to just focusing on their differences and how they're each adopting AI in their own way to drive their own function more efficiently. And I think there's a lot of anxiety with how do we orchestrate that. But if you just focus on the numbers, I think that kind of brings everyone back into alignment, don't you think?
I think there's like the job destruction fear of like, if I use AI, I'm not going to have a job anymore. And this is where I go back to like, what does the business need to do to be successful so you can have a job and you can keep growing, right? And so like, I think there's like a cultural bit, there's a fear bit, there's a functional bit, like, just like you said, Andy, right? It like contributes to the idea that we're all rowing in the same direction, as opposed to, oh, the software engineers are just going to build an AI to like take my job away. And it's like, that's not the intent. The intent is I need to ship more software faster to generate more revenue, to pay for more marketing, to help finance, so on and so forth. So I think it's a very hard challenge to drive cultural alignment. I think tool alignment and business alignment, but I think the fear is a real big problem. And it's going to take a long time for people to say, this isn't going to destroy jobs, it's going to create jobs. And then at the same time, you have companies going out there and saying, I'm going to lay off 30,000 people because of AI. Right. So there's a lot of moving pieces in this, but I think that first principle is key of like, if we hit these metrics and we drive this way, the business is going to be successful. We don't need to do layoffs. We don't need to even have these conversations.
Makes sense. That sounds smart.
So I think we've agreed upon that there needs to be unity and consistency in the metrics that we are driving towards. But there also has to be unity and consistency in how we are leveraging these different tools that we are allowing our teams to experiment with. So given, different tools, different workflows, Duncan, I'm curious as to how do you prevent fragmentation? If I can insert a quick accelerant anecdote, I was speaking to a CTO yesterday who's headed over to India today, and he wants to evaluate the AI effectiveness of his software development partner, specifically AI within the SDLC. And he is getting resources from an employment of record firm. And so there exists a ton of room for different resources to be using different AI tools in different ways, and for the output to obviously be inconsistent there. And so that's a very specific example, but just in general, how do you prevent this fragmentation, Duncan?
I think there's two ways to think about it. There's the democratized way where people use the best tool for the job at the time that they need to be successful. I think that works if you know what to measure. And again, to close the loop on that conversation, again, it's all about what you measure, right? You're going to optimize to what you measure. You got to plan for what you can measure and what you can capture and what you optimize based on. And so again, I think fragmentation's not the problem per se, except for InfoSec issues and some of those. It's more about what are you doing? Why are you doing it? Where are you trying to go? And what's the most effective way to get there, right? So in our organization, we have multiple tools, right? You can use Claude, you can use Cursor, you can use Windsurf, you can use tools that you want to use. We'd prefer if you use one of them so we don't have to pay for all of them. But it's really about the intent of what you're trying to get done and how you're doing it. I think when you get into levels of indirection between yourself and the people doing the work, you get into trouble. And this is why I go back to that flattening the organization where like you can use Accelerate, you can use some of these people offshore, but the reality is you have to be close to them. And you have to be an expert in what these tools are and what they're good at and what you can do with them at the same time. And that's where AI nativity comes in as a leader. Like you got to know what the best tool is for the job at any one time.
So as you're scaling these companies, do you see the biggest breakdown when leadership begins to create a gap in between the users of the technology and them not understanding how their employees are really leveraging on a day-to-day basis?
Yes. Just like as a VP of engineering, to not know the best way to architect a problem where your team's architecting and solving a problem becomes a big challenge the bigger you get, right? You don't need to write the code, but you should probably understand what they're doing and why. It's a very similar problem space. What's the right process? What's the right SDLC? What's the best tooling? You don't have to do legwork. Obviously, you have smart people that work for you to figure that stuff out. But at the same time, you should have a sense of what's right and wrong and how to use the tools.
I think it was interesting. We were talking about the different stakeholders and the expectations that they'll put on an engineering leader. For example, a CEO might be barking at you to produce faster, while a CFO wants you to focus on, the riskiness of the venture and making sure that there's no security leak. And so how do you kind of balance both of these initiative or mandates without completely slowing down your team and introducing too many guardrails that leave them ineffective to the competition?
It's probably the hardest challenge as a leader today. It's reduce costs, also spend more money on tokens, and also ship faster, right? You're being asked to do three things that are sometimes in opposition of each other. To me, the most important piece is to speak the same language as your stakeholders, right? Talk to the CFO about the implications of the cost increase and how that impacts the strategy of the CEO in this context, right? Of like, hey, we want to go faster. It's going to cost money. So how are you making the investment? How are you measuring that investment? How are you going to measure the return on investment? So at least the CFO might be mad at you for spending more money. They understand the investment thesis of the work you're going to do. I'm going to spend X% per employee salary on tokens. They can understand that math. So you can put it in their language to have that conversation. But the reality is when budget time hits, the questions are going to be very hard of, hey, CEO, you asked me to do X. It's going to cost Y. The CFO is telling me I get 80% of Y. What do you want me to do here? How do you close that loop and have that conversation? And if you're not speaking from the same language or glossary or information, it's going to be really hard to have it. So as an engineering leader, you're going to have to train yourself to be able to speak and have those conversations, because the CEO is just going to say, spend more, do more tokens, ship more software. The CFO is going to say, what does that mean from a business perspective? What are the business implications of that, right? So you're going to have to close that gap as a leader.
It's interesting. I think that you're obviously someone who is very well-spoken and confident, but a lot of technology leaders that I've come across are more introvert, and it's hard to have a conversation that's taking into consideration different stakeholders, things that drive them, things that motivate them, and to be able to get everyone speaking the same language and understanding how to move forward in a unified direction, I think is a lot more difficult than maybe you just described it now.
I think my advice to anyone that I talk to about any of these things is, you know more about this than anyone else in the room. And you should have a little bit of confidence in knowing that. Obviously, strong opinions loosely held. But the reality is, you're the only person in the room that knows how a token can translate into software. There's no one else in that room. They've read a LinkedIn post, or, their VCs are sending them whatever they're sending them. But the reality is, you're the expert, right? And I'm not saying be an egomaniac. I'm not saying you go out there and say a bunch of BS. I'm saying you go into the room and you understand, like, you build the model and you show them, like, this is how we're calculating it. They'll pressure test it. But the reality is, you're the expert. Hold that true in your head when you're having these conversations, and then have your company get you media training and some of the other stuff that comes along with it too, right? But the reality is, like, you're the expert. You're the CTO, the VP engineering, director of engineering, head of engineering, whatever the role title is, you're the only person in that room that knows.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you sound like the expert. You're being paid to be the expert. You're being paid to know more about this and to lead the organization from your role, your perspective, your function. And certainly, in our conversation right now, you sound like you have it all figured out. Or I shouldn't say all figured out. You have as much figured out, or close to as much as figured out as can be figured out at this time. And, I hearken back to this. A friend of mine wrote a book about the imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome is not about being a professional liar. It's about knowing your strengths, knowing your weaknesses, being put in a role of leadership, and learning while you do your craft and you produce, and having things figured out is all relative. I mean, we're always learning constantly. So in your case, Duncan, I'd like to know, like, what don't you quite have figured out yet?
I think it's a wonderful question. Self-retrospection time, right? Introspection on yourself of what it is, what isn't. I touched a little bit on this, and I make overtures quite a bit. I think all of this is changing really fast. And so, like, dynamicism is very, very important. And having to, as a software person, being a lifelong learner are the only two things that I know to be true. Everything else is going to change. That's why I keep joking, like, I'm going to get off this and I'm going to go check out what's changed in the last 2 hours, and something's probably changed, which is insane. It's amazing time. So as a lifelong learner, it's a wonderful experience. But things that I don't know, how are we going to long-term budget for AI use? Is it going to be per employee? Is it going to be per token? How's that going to align? When are the VCs going to stop covering the cost of token use and inference costs at the model level? So how much more expensive is Claude going to get? What happens if you invest your entire infrastructure on building Claude code? What happens long term? What's going to happen there? What's going to happen when coding is a solved problem at scale? And so how do you tell if an engineer is going to be a good engineer for you or not? That's like a very hard problem. Interviewing. I think the promotion rubric problem space is very hard. I think these are 3 or 4 problem spaces that need to get solved. Nobody's really felt the pain yet because it's still early, but I think it's coming. And then I think the thing I would say, I'd just jump back to the beginning of, just be a lifelong learner. People always ask me what they should change, what they should think about doing, what they should start doing. I say, don't stop being a lifelong learner. You got to be an expert in this space because you are being paid to be the expert in this space for your company.
Are those the 2 things that you're focused on the next 6 to 12 months, or are there other things that you're thinking about that you need to ground your execution around? Ground your learning, the implementation of your learning into the organization. Are those 2 things, or are there other things that you're focused on?
Those are 2 for sure. I think the third is the definition of AI nativity is a really, really interesting, like, AI amorphous word, right? People say AI nativity. Like, what does that really mean at a B2B
Yeah.
SaaS company? Or what does that really mean if, these large language models are going to become the orchestration layer? What does that really mean to be an MCP provider, to sell tokens, so on and so forth, right? So I think there's going to be a shift in how we think about building and selling software. I think that's the other thing that's on the back of my head. I think that's a 12 to 18 month problem. I think the interviewing and keeping good engineers excited to come to work every day with raises and accolades and so on and so forth, and measuring that's a big, that's going to be a very, very soon problem, because everybody can build a company soon. Anybody can write out one prompt and one shot of product. So what does that mean? How do you keep them at your company?
If I were to flip that question around just to the other side of the coin, if you don't get it right, what might happen? Over the next 6 to 12 months, as you're making all of these, you're learning, you're transitioning, you're redefining, you're executing. What wakes you up in the middle of the night in the cold sweat? I mean, honestly, anyone who's not waking up in the middle of the night in the cold sweat once a week,
Not paying attention.
not paying attention.
Yeah. I think to me, what keeps me up at night, and it doesn't really keep me up at night, it wakes me up in the middle of the night, cold sweat. At 4 a.m., I wake up and I go, oh my God, we're going to spend an exorbitant amount of money and investment on AI tools and retooling and the organizational structure, and training and coaching and mentoring, all of these things. What are the business implications on the medium to long term of what we're doing? How is the business going to get better? And so I think a lot about, I'm going to ask for all this money to spend on all of these tools, but how did our top line revenue or our retention go up, or whatever those metrics are? Because at the end of the day, those are the only things that really matter. We build software to sell it and to make money and to help our customers do their job better. If we do all of this investment and none of that changes, what does that mean? Like, what does that mean as an engineering leader who made that request, who did that work, who drove this as the tip of the spear, and the investment doesn't pan out? What does that mean?
If you had a crystal ball 12 months ago, well, maybe that's not the right way to phrase. I was going to say, like, what over the last 12 months have you done that if you wish you had the crystal ball, then you wouldn't have had to do something? And I mean, I think we all look back and say, like, we wasted time, we wasted money, we wasted effort, we wasted resources on this. When, if I had known what I'd known, if I had known back then what I knew today, I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah. The easiest one for me is the token maxing stuff. Like, we fell into that trap of like, oh, that's how we'll measure usage. And I think everybody is doing it still.
Yeah.
I kind of moved away from it pretty quickly. Just recognize that, like, we're incentivizing kind of like not misbehavior, but maybe misadventure as it relates to using these tools for maybe like too many POCs and too much fun. I think that's one. I think the other is I should have started 12 months ago talking about the only thing that matters is the business metrics, and all this other stuff is noise. I wish that would have been
that
a big change for my team.
Definitely. I mean, the moment we're in is really so interesting because, we're so excited about the opportunity, but we just wish we can execute as fast as we can, take on and absorb new things. But, if you're a startup, maybe you can do that. But if you're an organization with history and layers and politics and a certain amount of bureaucracy and SOPs, hard coded or written, and they need to be rewritten, and people need to blow so much stuff up, right? It's difficult for execution to catch up to innovation.
Inertia is a very funny thing in companies. Yeah. Very funny thing to look at.
Hey, Duncan, I want to wrap up with this last question. So I think we did a nice job of a retrospect. We also did a good job of talking about some of the anxieties and excitement that we might have moving forward. I'm going to ask you to put a stake in the ground with you are the expert in the room, as we just talked about. And so I want you to tell me to action what we've been speaking about. What do you feel confidently about that CTOs or VPs of engineering should either stop doing or doubling down for the next 12 months when it relates to AI in their organization?
Stop being concerned about what it means today. Start thinking about what it means over the next 6 to 12 months. Go all in today. Things are going to break. It's going to be weird. You're going to break things in production. AWS has outages because of AI these days. It's okay. But the reality is the industry's changing. Everything is changing. Your job's changing. Companies are changing. The way you raise money, the way businesses run, all going to change. Who knows what it looks like in 12 months? So basically stop being afraid and start leaning in and being the expert in your company and really grabbing the reins and driving how you want to drive it.
Now, I have a question in regards to that. So how do you prep your stakeholders to the fact that, look, everyone's learning. We're all making mistakes. We're all testing, trialing, sandboxing here. We're going to look back more so than we have in the past because things are changing so fast. And we're going to say like, oh, shouldn't have done that. I wish we would have done this sooner. I wish we had doubled down on something else. How does everyone maintain a sense of decorum without, pulling out the knives?
Yeah. Don't light everything on fire on your way to lifelong learning. I'll say that. Every company wants to iterate faster. I don't think there's a single organization in the world that's like, I want to go slower and not iterate as fast, and I want to be stuck in our ways for forever, right? So I think you're going to get a lot of excitement about this. And, these companies are doing enough marketing on our behalf to know that like things are changing, things are moving very fast. So really what it comes down to is how do you move very quickly while reducing blast radius? Are you just going to make build and release effective way faster? Are you going to build a better log monitoring tool? Are you going to reduce costs in this area using AI? Are you going to do X, Y, and Z feature capability in 2 weeks instead of 6 months? What are the ways that you can reduce blast radius to show the value, to start building the momentum and engendering the trust with the organization? Because the reality is a company that is AI native and moving very quickly is going to be able to catch up to you very quickly. And so I think there's a lot of the fear in leadership teams right now that you can play into and just say, hey, we need to start testing this. We need to start moving very quickly in this way. We need to look at the experts who know how to do this, that we can bring on board to help us with this. That really goes down to blast radius and just saying, this is what could break. This is how we are mitigating. This is the test that we're going to do. This is what we're going to attack. We'll know in 2 weeks if it's the right idea or not.
Interesting.
Culture of innovation.
Yeah. I mean, look, honestly, I could go down this rabbit hole for the next hour because I'm just people are paranoid about their own positions. They're paranoid about the status of their own function leadership. There's, we're rewriting SOPs as we speak in regards to how we interact with one another. And people are frail and a little bit sensitive about the culture, not just of the company that they work in, but their role in that and their future role in that. It's kind of a challenging time, and I don't want to overlayer this conversation with too much paranoia because it's both exciting, but people are different. Each person is different in the way they handle stress and innovation, and there's actually a relative small number of people that are sort of wonder and inventors, and visionaries, and most of the people are galvanizers and they're executors, and they're being asked to somewhat lean into sides of their personality that isn't necessarily part of who they are, where they don't find energy and happiness, and where they're not their most productive. Organizations are asking them to go with the flow. Well, there's a very small percentage that that's their sweet spot is change and innovation and creation. So anyway, that's any comment on that?
I tell technology people all the time, be very careful about how you talk about these tools, these capabilities. And that's why I keep going back to that, learn the language of the people, your stakeholders, and speak in their languages. There's nothing scarier to a finance person to tell them hey, the answer could be non-deterministic. We don't know what the actual result's going to be. They would be like, what in the world are you talking about? The math, 1 must equal 1. There's no way that's going to work if it's to your CFO, right? So you have to learn how to meet them where they are on their journey of tip of the spear innovation, fear, risk, so on and so forth. And so it's not just the glossary, it's the intent. Hey, I'm going to increase output with decreasing costs. Exciting finance person, right? They don't need to know that maybe it's going to break 5 times before you get it the 6th time right. So yeah. I agree. I fundamentally agree with you. Software people scare the heck out of a lot of other people. by the way that they operate, the way that they move, their move fast and break things thing
And more so
does
today
not
than
work
ever.
for most people.
Yeah, it's very intimidating, more so today than ever. I think,
Oh, yeah.
other functions look at the software people saying, they're going insane over there. I mean, like, I don't understand what they're talking about these days or how they're accomplishing things. And people seem to be running around with like chickens with their heads cut off. But it is with a purpose, though, and it is towards an evolution of their culture. And just when we transition from waterfall to agile, and we transition from domestic to global, and now we're transitioning from global to AI first principles. It's just change is happening a lot faster, especially this go around than it ever has before. But what stands out to me is that it's not just about adopting AI. It's also about rethinking how companies operate at the most fundamental level, right?
Yeah.
100%. 100%.
And to me, beyond that, Andy, it's clear that while this opportunity is massive, I think the challenge lies in actually executing on that, across different team systems and workflows.
So Duncan, thanks for joining us. This was a great conversation.
Could go for hours and hours. Thanks for having me, Andy and Tomas. It's been great.